Good evening, everyone. I would like to call to order the May 11th, 2017 meeting of the Council Strategic Planning Committee. Roll call, Madam Secretary, who's watching at home. Let the record show that Councilman Oliver Joseph and Benny Johnson are absent, but we're delighted to have sitting instead of at least one of them, I don't know which one, our Chairman, Bill Dawson. So if everyone would please rise, we will have the invocation tonight by Councilman John Cagnalotti and remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Heavenly Father, we ask your blessings on this gathering this evening. We ask that you guide this commission to do the will of the people and that we would do it for their best interests and not our own. We ask you to watch over the people of Ascension Parish, the soldiers, police officers, and firefighters who go to do their job to protect us and keep us safe. In Jesus' name we pray.
Amen. Amen.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, item number 3 on the agenda is public comment period. I have several up here already, but I see some folks are still signing up. We don't have a secretary, so if you're still coming to get a card to speak on item number 5 or 6 or both, fill it out and you have to bring it back up to me. Councilman Lawler has agreed to do the timing tonight for the public comment, so we'll let him serve the dual purpose of secretary. If you hand it to him while we're getting along with the meeting, that would be acceptable as well. The chair's addition was inadvertently left off of the agenda, but I do have an addition tonight. The committee members are well aware of this. I thought what we would do is show you a little PowerPoint presentation I prepared tonight. I want to say from the beginning, it deals with obviously the two topics tonight of drainage. I thought it would be educational and would serve as a good segue into both of these topics. I'm not the author of this presentation per se, although I participated in it. It was sent to me by a follower, a constituent, although I did vet the numbers and everything in it to assure that they are accurate. But as I say, I think it's very educational. So we'll start with that. John, if you could put that up there. The title of this is Population Growth, and that's not just in Ascension Parish, as you see, as it relates to parish flooding issues in what we're looking at here in a tri-parish region. That would be East Baton Rouge, Ascension Parish, and Livingston. And as you know, we're all combined together and held sort of together by the glue of the Amite River and Bayou Manchac. And we'll be looking at that in a minute on a map. I think what's important to note from the get-go is that all of this data I'm going to show you came from census data, okay? From 1990, sort of like comparing where were we at 1990 to 2010. So that's a 20-year period in terms of population growth and in terms of those areas as it relates to the great flood we just had of 2016. You can see there in one of the two bullet statements that statewide the population in this tri-parish region of East Baton Rouge, Ascension, and Livingston from 1990 to 20, that 20-year period again grew by 7.4%. In actual number, that would be 396 people. If we compare and contrast that then to the same situation since 1990 going to 2010, same 20-year period, the population, however, in the tri-state parish area of East Baton Rouge, Ascension, Livingston grew a whopping 32%, or 156,574 people, okay? If we put that, the magnitude then of that tri-parish growth into perspective, you see in the red print down there, the population growth then during this 20-year period in the tri-parish region alone represented 53%. I repeat that, 53% of the entire statewide population growth. So we came up with something called the Drainage Channel Region, or DCR. And I'm going to show you a map of that in a minute, so if you just can hold water, I want to first define what that is, not was, is. The DCR, or Drainage Channel Region, is, in the map coming up, the shaded areas you're going to see. And it represents the voting precincts that are adjacent to each bank of two waterways, the Amite River and Bayou Manchac, as both of these waterways traverse through our three parishes of East Baton Rouge, Ascension, and Livingston in the state of Louisiana. And so here's what that map looks like. I don't have a pointer that I can actually show you, but you can see it. That blue shaded area then would be, you know, just taking every precinct in those three parishes on each side of the banks of the Meat, and you see that as the black squiggly line going down from north to south, and I've got it labeled there, a Meat River with a green arrow. As it goes all the way down to and then moves off to the left, that's Bayou Manchac, the northernmost boundary of but not only Ascension Parish and southernmost boundary of East Baton Rouge, but certainly of my District 4. And of course, if you move to the right and go, well, let me go further left. If you go further on Bayou Manchac, you're going into District 8, I guess, with Terry Casso. If you move off to the right, you're going to Councilman Lawler's district, which is District 7. And then, of course, it goes down through, I guess, French settlement and so forth, and continues to go down south all the way until it enters in that blue body of water you see down there, which, of course, is Lake Maurepas. So the idea here then is the drainage channel region is to take a look at some of these same population growth numbers I gave you for the state of Louisiana and for all three parishes together, but just in the drainage channel region. Watch what happened. Here's some of the facts. What really complicates, in my opinion, the current routine flooding issues in Ascension Parish, notwithstanding, I'm not here to argue tonight in any meaningful way that we had a great flood. Force majeure, many people call it an act of God, and we know about that in August of 2016. No doubt, it was extraordinary. We were originally told, however, that, you know, we didn't do anything man-made to really, you know, add to the problem. It was an act of God, and then later we I think changed our thinking. I think wisely so, that there may be some problems in watersheds and some flooding of neighbors as we build up property in these watersheds, and therefore servient property becomes dominant, and then the dominant property that was dumping water on that servient property is not there anymore. And certainly we could argue that would be a good place to look, would be in this drainage channel region. So in 1990, here's what happened. The population within this DCR was 69,672 citizens. By 2010, 20 years later, it had increased to 127,971. That's quite a lot. So we can say thus during this 20-year period alone, the DCR witnessed an increase in population of nearly 60,000 people, 58,299 to be exact, or should have put mega whopping, 83%. So earlier you saw, during the same time period, the entire parish region of Baton Rouge, East Baton Rouge, Ascension and Livingston, grew at a pretty robust rate. I showed you it was 32%. And that was nearly 4.5 times faster than the entire state of Louisiana, which was around 7 point, whatever it was, I think 4%. Yet this DCR region grew at the astounding rate of 83. So putting all that in perspective, we have 7%, 32%, and 83%. Not convinced yet. Here's just a few more factoids, and we'll get into our two agenda items on the DCR's population growth statistics. The DCR has grown, in fact, in population 10 times faster than the state population, and 2.5 times faster than the tri-parish region's population since 1990. So it's from 1990 again to 2010. If we were to consider the DCR as a parish itself, just that shaded region on the map I showed you, based on the 2010 census data, it would be the 11th most populated parish in the state. And we have what, Bill, 40, 50, 64, Mr. Cagnolati is saying, parishes in the state of Louisiana. We'd be number 11. If the DCR was in fact its own parish based on the 2010 census data, just the population growth alone, that 58,299 people I mentioned, that would make it the 17th most populated parish in the state. But here's the kicker. That little region, that shaded region, the DCR itself, represents only less than 1%, 0.7% of the entire state's landmass. Yet it represented 19%, almost 20% of the state's total increase in population from 1990 to 2010. Let me repeat that. Less than 1% of the entire state landmass, but 20% when we look at the population. So I'm going to summarize with this. Just the population growth alone, at 58,299, in the DCR is equivalent to the total population of Ascension Parish back in 1990, okay, in 2010. And of course, this is a little dated already because we're sitting here at 2017. Doesn't even account for what happened in the last 7 years. 35% of the total Tri-Parish region's growth in population has occurred, in fact, within the drainage channel region, going along the banks of the Amite River and Bayou Manchac. Yet the DCR represents only 26% of the landmass of the entire Tri-Parish region. So what's the bottom line, ladies and gentlemen? The growth in the DCR, I think, understatement. It's been enormous, just enormous. And there's a quote down there, our waterways, I believe, are like our highways. We cannot accumulate capacity unless we discontinue unbridled growth and embrace infrastructure-guided growth in conjunction with making plans to grow our capacity, unquote. And that's it, and there's the map. I don't know if it's the pleasure of this council, but if so, I'm fully willing to supply a copy of this for placement on before asked on channel 21 or whatever. With that, then, we'll segue into item number 4, approval of our minutes from the, April 13th, 2017 meeting. Do I hear a motion?
Second.
Have a motion by Mr. Lawless, second by Mr. Cagnolati to approve the minutes. Is anybody, any discussion? Anybody object? Hearing none, motion carries. Item number 5 is improvement of the Land Development Code's drainage impact studies. I've listed myself in there, but really I sent it to the secretaries with Jerome Fournier, so we'll ask Jerome to come on up and to also send me anything that has to do with our drainage impact studies like we did for traffic impact studies that's in our codes. And that's Appendix 5, is it, Jerome?
It is,
Yeah.
yes.
And so, I apologize, Jerome. I'm gonna make you sit down again. I was reminded that we have public comments on this.
Okay, yeah.
I was gonna try to, I'm really trying to help get out of here so that John can make his commitment at 7 p.m. But let's see, that's number 6. Mr. Jeff Pettit, I believe you filled the card out for number 5, sir. And if you can come up here, if you're not a regular speaker in front of this group or other council committees and groups, please state your address.
My name is Jeff Pettit, 11329 Family Road, Gonzales, Louisiana. The thing about the drainage studies is, let me just say this. We're 2 years behind on drainage, which we all just learned that the administration finally admitted that we were behind on drainage. There are many residents, myself among them. I've had a request in for 10 years to have my ditches cleaned and my neighbor's ditches cleaned, the Mears ditches that drains into Bayou Fountain. It took 10 years to have that done. That's one point. The second point is last summer, I believe it was in June, at a drainage meeting, I asked the Drainage Committee and Bill Rue to publish a schedule with a timeline to clean the ditches in the parish. That is yet to be published. And do we have a schedule? They finally came and cleaned my ditches 3 months in November of 2016, 3 months after I flooded. But they didn't clean my neighbors upstream from me, and they didn't clean my neighbors downstream from me. So it didn't do any good. So where is the rhyme or reason to what we're doing with our schedule? It's not there. And I'll let that go with that. I mean, it's not there. It's hit and miss. It's whoever calls and knows somebody gets their ditches cleaned. And if you don't know somebody, you wait like me 10 plus years. It's ridiculous. And it's inefficient. And it's a money waster. Moratorium. Until we solve these problems.
Jeff, can we get you to come back up for 6?
Yeah, I didn't sign for 6. Can you add me to
I
it?
can add you to it, sir. Does that conclude the remarks on item 5?
Retention ponds. We're talking about drainage. Let's go back to retention ponds. Has anybody here seen a retention pond drop in level? I've seen people fishing in them. There's fish growing. Has anybody seen a retention pond drop in level? So how are they truly working to retain the water on the area that Phil was brought into? So, I mean, people fish out of them. Come on, give me a break. If fish are growing or living and breeding in those retention ponds, you cannot tell me that that water is flowing out of them unless it's overtopping. You got to look at the soil composition. Where's the soil engineering tests on these retention ponds to see if they actually function the way they're supposed to? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pettit. Our second speaker this evening on item 5 is Mr. Chase Melanson.
Hey, how are y'all doing this evening?
And before you start, Chase, are you 5 and 6, or just did you put 5?
Oh, 5 and 6. I filled out one for
Okay.
each.
I was closer to 5'10", but that's okay.
We weren't we weren't referring to your height, sir, but
No, no.
you do look a lot higher than
I'm
5'6".
at least 5'9". Every bit. On item number 5, Mr. Pettit actually touched on what I wanted to start my conversation with, was the retention ponds. I've been to a few of the planning and zoning, meetings, and they talk about the mass volume that the ponds hold and how they redistribute it back into the drain, the ditches, roadside and whatnot. And I also want to point out, I've never seen a pond in a subdivision development that was, at minimum half full, much less, almost completely empty. And whenever you have ponds that, at that size and, a flood, whenever it's overflowing, there's no real calculation of how fast this water is being discharged back downstream onto the neighbors and, the people who've been there for decades and not experiencing it. And also, this could be ignorance here, but I'm also under the impression that we have statute in place of filling in natural drainage. I'm not 100% sure how that works. If somebody's been there 20 years, there's a lot on side of them to where it naturally holds water, and then we come develop that, and then that water is shed onto the neighbor. Is the parish responsible for that? Is that something that we should be looking into, that we're not looking into? Or, maybe I just, not reading the ordinance correctly. And also, as far as they go, it's 8-9 months now deep after, the event everybody knows, the flood. And we still don't have, any plans. We talk about planning a plan, or there might be a meeting about a plan. And until we start coming up with some real solutions and whatnot, I just don't know how effective we can, take the drainage surveys into what they truly mean. It's impossible for every subdivision and development in this parish to have zero drainage impact, and yet everybody floods. And, that's just a little common sense. And that's about all I have to say on it. So I hope y'all would, further look into, doing something with these drainage surveys. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Melanson. Samantha Shin.
Good evening. I'm at 17579 Simpson Road. I think that the drainage systems do need to be looked at. I think I'm in agreement that the retention ponds, I've never seen one that's half empty, nearly empty. I always see people fishing in them. So they're not doing their job, in my opinion. I don't think they're given the chance to when they're filled so much for leisure at this point. Also, the ditches, I've lived on Simpson Road since 2006, and I think the ditch has been taken care of once since we've been there. So again, that would point to the first speaker, 10 years to get something done. I do agree that it needs to be looked at, and I don't have all the numbers, but my personal feelings as being a resident in Ascension growing up, and now a resident owning a home in Ascension, I don't want to be the neighbor that floods because a new neighborhood comes up next to me anymore. So That's what I have for that.
Thank you, Ms. Shin. Our next speaker this evening on item 5 is Gretchen, is that Tullier? Tullier, sorry, ma'am.
I'm Gretchen Touye. I live at 15230 Stafford Estates in Gonzales. I have lived there since 1972. Drainage is a problem. The last time our natural drain was cleaned out when Mr. Burat was with the police jury. We had, juror, excuse me. We had, I've called Dempsey several times, Dempsey Lambert, my councilman. Phil Savoy, which they both finally did come out to see not only the drainage problem, but the effect that Hidden Cove subdivision has on my subdivision. Because it's, the elevation is much higher than my subdivision. It drains to the back, which means it falls on my subdivision. I do have pictures to show you of, if that's okay, if that's allowed.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Let's see here. I don't know if you can see. Okay.
Give her a little more time. if you can.
There you go.
There you go.
This is the back of my subdivision coming up to Hidden Cove. You can see where this is when they started the dirt work to build up, because that used to hold water. To build up, the water comes through my subdivision. We have people in our subdivision now that can't flush their toilets or take a bath when it rains, just after a heavy rain. We have problems with, I had Phil and Dempsey out there. They both agreed that the retention pond was not high enough. They also both agreed that the PVC pipe that's coming through the retention pond to drain is not the correct size. I've talked to several of my neighbors. This is what I'm talking about with the, it's hard for you to see. If you're standing in my subdivision, which is Stafford Estates off of 931, and Hidden Cove off of 44 comes to the back of my subdivision, the elevation is dramatic. I mean, they said it's not over 3 feet. It is. What can we do about it? Now, they are cleaning out the ditches on Cemetery Road, which is to the back of my subdivision on the right side, which heads towards Joe Saverio. They're gonna clean the drainage and make the ditch between the back of my subdivision and Hidden Cove deeper, but it's very narrow. That's not the problem. When we had the heavy rain, or anytime it's a heavy rain, it's a problem for my subdivision. I talked to some of the guys out there one day, and they said, well, that's just an old subdivision. Sir, I've been living here since 1972. It might be old, but it's my home.
Thank you, Ms. Touye. Our last speaker on number 5 is Mr. Randy Shin.
Good evening. I'm Randy Shin, 17566 Simpson Road. With regards to item 5, improvement of LDC's drainage, or LDC and drainage impact studies, I'd like to propose a few ideas. One is that an annual drainage impact study be done with newly collected data, not based on data from 20 years ago. Collect the data from the past 5 years and the past 10 years. Then that data needs to be compared to the previous data from following the next year, from the next 5 and the next 10 years. This needs to be an annual inspection, an annual survey to see how well the LDC is doing in managing the new subdivisions and the new businesses that get the approvals to be built. Because they're all having an impact on the drainage, not just leaves and trees and that sort of thing. Those things have an impact on that. That 83%, that's the impact. These studies must include any new and approved land development, as I just mentioned, and show a potential worst-case scenario in these studies of 12 inches of precipitation in a 12-hour period. This was not equal to the 2016 flood. This would be equal to a thunderstorm in relation to tropical storms, which are not, they're act of God also, but they're a lot more common than what we saw last fall. The LDC should no longer allow or give variances for land developers to change the natural ridge line and drainage boundaries. This will make more accurate assessment for the parish drainage system. Funny? I don't think so.
I'm having difficulties working this. I'm acting as secretary also.
Oh,
That's why. I'm pressing buttons and it's just not working.
okay.
I'm laughing at Aaron.
But by making the annual studies more accurate, it will actually show, is the department of the the department that's supposed to be taking to the drainage of the parish, are they doing a good job? Are they keeping up? Evidently they're not. They're 2 years behind, just on maintaining. Drainage impact studies should include BPMs for the drainage department. The best management practices should have a 1-year follow-up and a 2-year target for them to be completed. The LDC needs to be more proactive with runoff water from land, rather than allowing retention-style wet ponds like what we see everywhere with paddle boats in them and people fishing, like everybody said. Need to incorporate a detention pond, a dry-style pond, where after the rains, these ponds have drained back down. Where in the event that we have a issue like we did last fall, these ponds will be empty. They'll be able to accept rainwater of a great magnitude. And last, the LDC needs to be a proactive representative of the homeowners, not just of the parish, but of the homeowners. You're giving permission to builders and contractors that have effects on existing homeowners. And that shouldn't be, we shouldn't have to come up here and ask for this. You should already be doing this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shin. Yes. Mr. Cloyd, you know you are. Why don't you come on up, sir? I'll just add it to your card, Randy.
All right. Well, just to touch, and I'm, mainly looking at number 6, but on number 5, I mean, long before in this, people referring to the Great Flood, I refer to it as a devastating flood. We've had complaints in front of us, and I've been in your chairs before, and sit still in there, that we've had people that have built up land next to their neighbors with complaints into the administration, into the departments, into their council members like myself and you guys, and with us with no good regulations to go back and try to help those people. We believe that being good neighbors, that if you're going to do something on your land, then you need to take care of whatever difference you're making in the drainage. Drainage studies, silt fencing, the whole 9 yards. It's basically these guys, these residents, and a lot of residents in my district and District 6, they're just at the mercy of whatever somebody's doing around them. And we definitely need to improve our regulations. We've been told on one that I had since early in 2016 to mid-2016, off of Stringer Bridge Road and off of Tipo Lane, that we couldn't, there's nothing they could do with these folks that's building up until they go to get a permit to build a home. By that time, it's too late unless you got some kind of rules and regulations, laws, you can go make them change everything they've done. But 2 years' worth of buildup. We've heard people talk about retention ponds. I've had a good friend of mine was here last year, and it's long before the flood, and, you know, in front of planning and zoning for a subdivision, and, you know, his remarks were quite true, but it sounded funny at the time, is how much water does a full pond hold, you know? All right, so while that study looks good, and I know we've got some engineers in the audience that could probably explain to us the whole concept of the retention pond. But Councilman Johnson and I have had, within the last year, a subdivision that came up. We don't have a great number of subdivisions in our areas, but we've had a subdivision that came up. That's actually, whatever they do, they're gonna build across a natural floodplain, a low floodplain. And you know, when you block it off, you can have channels, you can have ponds. But when you build up, so that was debated pretty heavily, and it was actually agreed upon they weren't going to build up, and the people were going to, you know, do something different there for large lots. But we still have a lot of people that we've seen, and it's been more since the flood, because the last thing I want to do, as we go to item number 6, the last thing I want to do, I got thousands of people that are trying to get back in their homes. And a lot of those homes are not going to get there without some dirt. Okay? So, you know, as long as we can try to get something going, and get something to where if somebody does have to build up to do what they've got to do, that they have some way for that water to drain off there. And I'm talking about the residential lots, not the large subdivisions. I just do not want to, I want to try to do something. We've been working for a while here. Try to do something for the residents. Get these folks back in these homes. Take care of some of these folks' complaints. But not necessarily just stop everything. Still got people living in campers, living in FEMA trailers. So I ask the mercy of this committee to keep that in mind whenever we're going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Kluot. I think that completes everything unless I've miscounted. Or is anyone out in the audience still wish to speak on item number 5? Okay, with that, then we'll close the public comment period, and maybe Mr. Jerome, if you'd come back up, sir. Jerome, how do we fix this?
That's a loaded question. I
know.
I sent you the material that you'd asked for, Chairman Sarley, and I think one of the things that I'd like to do is say that we've, in our department, are working with council, with the development community, and are cognizant of what's happening out in the field. We go out there, we get complaints daily. We look at situations. It's our department to, it's the duty of the Planning and Development Department to look at subdivisions, make sure they're in compliance with the ordinance that we have in place. And if it's the council's decision to change that ordinance, we will make sure that everybody's in compliance with it. But right now, it's our duty to make sure that they're in compliance with what exists presently. I forwarded you the Appendix 5 out of Unified Land Development Code, which is the drainage section of the ordinance. I am, like I mentioned to you before in a previous presentation here, I'm not a civil engineer, I'm a planner, and we rely on civil engineers in order to interpret this and make sure that the studies that are being prepared are in compliance with the ordinance and meet best management practices or best engineering practices in terms of preparing these studies, making sure that things are on the up and up. I have with me tonight Mr. Sean Chereau and Mr. Michael Sanji from CSRS, who is our engineering review agency, and both are civil engineers, and both can address this issue, let you know what a retention pond is, what a detention pond is. There's a difference. How these things interact with the development community and how they interact with our drainage network in the parish. So with that, I can answer some rather generalized questions, but if they're specific to the civil engineering aspects of how these things are done, I'd like to defer those questions to them.
Yeah, I just have one question for you, Jerome, and love
Sure.
to hear from the engineers, and even before that, let the rest of this body ask you questions as well. I see in multiple places, and without citing the actual sections of Appendix 5 in the code, that there is something called a drainage, quote, drainage impact fee policy in the planning department. What is that, and could we see a copy of it? Is it just a form or something that's used to, does it in any way standardize or assume all these drainage impact studies are different depending on subdivision? I know the rules and regs change by size of lot, and as
Right.
Mr. Cloat was talking about, and things of this nature, but
Correct.
what exactly is our drainage impact?
We don't collect impact fees like we do transportation fees for drainage. The impact fees that I think that they're referring to here are the fees that we collect from development community in order to fund the review and the inspections and everything else that occur when a subdivision is developed.
That's good to know, because I thought maybe there'd be a surprise fund there or something, because I was
No.
unaware that we would have,
No.
I knew we had sewer, and I
No.
knew we had transportation, but
No, we do
it
not.
does refer to that, so that's probably just a misspeak in the code, or just maybe not a good, how do the attorneys always say, an awfully crafted
Yeah.
language?
Yeah.
to
Well,
maybe,
we collect fees.
That's not gonna help us not flood anymore, but maybe it's something we could look at and change. I'd
Right.
like to, I did lie to you, I did have one more thing, section 17507B4, are we enforcing that?
17507.
To help you, it's, I realize it catches you without looking it up.
Well, I have it right in front
Post-construction,
of me.
a neighbor, let's say, is flooding like we heard about with inappropriate size of pipes, or maybe banks of ditches aren't high enough. It says Ascension Parish engineer will come out, and if he determines that, even though we had the impact study and we built the subdivision, these people that weren't flooding before are flooding, they will require the new homeowner to do something about it.
Yeah, I'm going to have to defer that question to Mr. Bill Rue, who's Department of Public Works, because once the subdivision has been developed and we have servitudes, we maintain the ditches, we maintain all that, it basically transfers over to DPW.
Yeah, and the reason I asked the question is we saw this in transportation with Councilman Lawler's meeting, where individuals came up about transportation impact fee now, and talking about, well, if it's always no significant impact, like drainage is, and it's working, and we heard a lot of testimony from, I guess it was Mr. Lambert at Vectura, that we have what everybody else has, and it's great, it's working, all this kind of stuff. I think it might have been Mr. Law that asked it, and I think it was an excellent question. Well, so do you come out after and to say, now the subdivision is built, and check to see if the road has really been impacted? I think the same thing can be said about, rather than people calling up or coming to this meeting and constantly saying, filled up ponds are for fishing and paddle boats, and they aren't working when we have a storm, and showing me pictures that my property is flooded, and it's not even a 1,000-year event. It is just a 10-year storm or 25 or whatever it is. Right. And actually, I lied again. There was a third question. Are we adequate, in your opinion, or maybe one of the engineers, with a 10-year storm event, or should we be at 25 or higher? Because it seems like one person here earlier said something about a 12-inch rain in a 12-hour period. I believe I read in our code we were at 8.5 inches in 24 hours, or
I think you're accurate on that.
something like that.
Yeah,
Is that a high enough threshold, sir?
Well, I'm going to defer that question to the engineers.
Thank you, Jerome. But before you go, though, you're not off the hot seat. Councilman Lawler.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Jerome. I don't know if you can answer this. When do we inspect the retention ponds during the construction period? Because when I heard Ms. Touye talking about that, that raised a lot of concerns.
Those are being inspected throughout the subdivision construction process. We have subdivision inspectors that go out there from day one. We're inspecting the grading operations. We're also inspecting as they're constructing roads, sewer lines, water lines, everything that's public infrastructure. And the ponds are considered public infrastructure. So we are inspecting those. And we are inspecting them to make sure that they're the adequate size and depth according to the plans that have been approved. Right? So,
And what kind of recordation do we have of that? I mean, sure we record that somewhere.
yes, we do. You know, we have a recordation of that. When projects like this are being constructed, we have a set of construction plans. Those construction plans are used by the engineer of record, by the contractor, and it's also looked at by the inspectors, right? And so once the project's been completed, they process a set of what's called as-built plans. And the as-built plans dictate what actually was built out in the field. They should mimic exactly what was built, but sometimes you're in the field, there's small differences out there, and they will be noted on the as-built plans. And we keep those in-house, we have those, and we can reference those.
Okay. You know, I have to say, in my neighborhood, we have retention ponds, and I find they work tremendously well. Now, we certainly had flooding. We had 98 houses at about 250 flood, but our retention ponds, and the engineers can probably explain it better, but they do hold water. We fish in them all the time. I kayak through them, but there's about a 5.5-foot difference from my yard to where the water level is.
Right.
That is the retention. And part of what I see is I see some of these subdivisions that don't seem to have that difference. It's not about the depth of the pond. The pond can really be 6 inches deep for a retention pond, as long as you've got an area above it that can be filled by the water and then drain out. Is that correct?
And that's the capacity that's calculated into the configuration of the pond.
And do we test the capacity after the pond has been built and before releasing the contractor or the developer?
I'm going to have to defer that to Sean, because Sean's out there during the inspection process.
Because I think that's the important part. If the capacity is not up to a 10-year capacity,
Right.
then we're not getting what we're paying for.
Of course, yeah, right.
Councilman Dawson.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Jerome. I'd like for you to just walk through the relationship to the Land Development Code and Floodplain Management Ordinance. And
Okay. Well, the Land Development Code basically works in conjunction with floodplain, right? So we're trying to maintain the parameters of the floodplain within the drainage ordinance. And what that means is that we can take fill, we can modify the land, so to speak, within a subdivision by using fill. Fill has to be monitored during the construction process. We're not bringing fill into the floodplain. We're only using the amount of dirt that's in the floodplain to kind of shape the land. We can't bring in fill. We can't create more disruption within that floodplain than what was there before. You know? So that's basically how it works. And I'm going to have to defer some of this to the engineers, because they can give you the exact relationship between those two. All right. But yeah.
Okay.
I wish I could give you a little more information, but it gets into rather specifics, and it gets into some of the figures and some of the engineering aspects of what we're doing with this.
But would it be correct to say that we have the Floodplain Management Ordinance?
Yes.
And that the Land Development Code should be in compliance with that?
It should,
Is that the
yes.
order of that?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
And we do have a floodplain engineer within DPW, right? So that person is monitoring this as well. That's not the planning department, but that's in DPW. So.
Thank you.
Mr. Kettler, did you have anything for Jerome? Okay, thank you. Jerome, before you go, one more thing. Section 17506.D.B, as well as Section 175013.A.B.1, both refer to an ADI-SPD. Stands for Ascension Drainage Impact Study Policy Document.
Okay.
So this ain't impact fee when I asked you about, but this sounds like there is something in-house that y'all have. Could we take a look at that, or what does it say, or?
I can get that to you. Right. I don't have a copy of it with me right now.
Does it standardize what the expectation of a developer is each time in doing these drainage impact studies?
Again, I'm going to defer that to the engineers. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
One more question from Councilman Lawler.
Yeah, actually, what I'd like to see, next meeting, if, we can return and just get a report on the Hidden Cove subdivision with the drainage problems that we've heard.
Sure.
Make sure it's up to code, if we're putting two smaller pipes in, just see what happened.
Yep. I'm fully
What the
aware of that
future
project,
holds.
and we've been monitoring it.
Okay,
Yes.
is that common? Do we see that often?
In terms of what?
Small pipes, low levies, I call them levies,
Yeah.
low capacity.
Well, they have a detention pond in that project, and it's supposed to be detaining the water that falls on that project. You know, in terms of accumulating or accounting for sheet flow that used to flow into a low-lying area, where we now have a subdivision, that should be compensated for in the design of the project, right? And it should be having ditches or some way of rerouting the water around that without flooding the neighboring properties, right? So we have been monitoring that particular subdivision, and I'll report back to you on that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Any other questions for Jerome? Okay.
Yeah, I'll have.
Thank you. I'm Michael Sanji with CSRS. We represent the parish as a third-party review agency for the Planning Commission on all of the subdivision and commercial development submittals. First of all, I certainly feel for everyone in the parish with what happened last August. But I also know from other municipalities and parishes that we work for that even since that flood, we've had some very significant and very intense rainfall events. And I wanted to open with that to first address Councilman Satterley's question about the 10-year rainfall event and is that sufficient. A 10-year rainfall event, I believe, is 8-point-something inches in a 24-hour period. It doesn't take much to know, if you just read the papers about inches of rain that fall, that it certainly seems that we get to that quite often. And if you boil that down into a 12-hour period, it would be even less than that. So, you know, I don't know what's going on in the world of climate change, but I certainly think that there is room to look at statistically, and we're not climatologists, but I do think that there's room to look at what has happened in the last, 5-10 years to determine is more needed. Other communities, in some cases, do require more than a 10-year event. We're helping the parish of Calcasieu write drainage ordinances. They do not have any detention requirements lock solid like you do here. They are looking at a 25-year event. I want to caution you that a 25-year event on a detention pond versus a 10-year event might increase the size 10, 15%. Sean could tell you a whole lot better than me. It's not a night and day difference. A 25-year event, instead of 8 inches, it might be 10 inches. So it's an incremental step, but that's all that it is. So to answer your question on that, Councilman, I would certainly say that the door is open to look at that if that is the wish of the committee. All right, I'm going to try to explain detention ponds, and I'm going to try to do it in a layman's term. The ordinance, the policy you just referred to, the drainage impact policy, is designed around a very simple concept, and that is if you own 10 acres of land, it drains somewhere. And when and as it drains somewhere, it has a peak rate of runoff in a 10-year storm event. So the theory is simple, is that when you finish developing, after you add your houses and driveways and roads and all that, and better slopes, and you cut out the ponding, that you still need to drain into the same place, but you do not need to drain at any higher rate than that existing peak runoff, okay? The only way that you can do that is to store water. That is the only way you can do it. You must store water somewhere. So a piece of land that used to store water because we're flat here in South Louisiana is now being forced to store it in a pond. And not only that, we go through very rigorous calculations, Sean reviews, that determine how much storage is required. Councilman Lawler has it correct. So if natural ground is as high as this ledge here, they have to dig out the pond deep enough that from the low pool, the low stage of the pond, what we call a normal pool, up to the top bank, is storing that volume of water. And the peak water surface of that pond still has to be a foot or two or maybe more below the road elevations because the storm drain system is draining into that. What developers have chosen to do, because of aesthetics and lot value and quality of life, is to say below that level of the lake that you see, they could leave the dirt right there. But guess what it's going to do? It's going to grow grass. It's going to be wet. It's going to be unsightly. It's going to, harbor animals we don't want. So they choose to excavate an additional 5 or 6 feet. And Sean, we have a minimum, I believe, of 6, 7 feet. That if they want to do a wet pond, that they must dig out because we know it's going to silt in a little bit. But they have to excavate out that additional material in order to create what we call the wet lake. But we are not compromising the amount of storage volume that is required by allowing them to dig out a wet lake. That is a extremely common practice, and in most instances and jurisdictions, it's the preferred practice for the reason I just mentioned. They don't want to have an unsightly pond where you can't maintain it. And in South Louisiana, when you dig down that deep, and it's flat, you're not going to be able to maintain it. It's just too wet. So I'm not here to stand up and say that every pond in this parish is designed properly, built properly, hasn't silted in, or there's some trouble spots out there. I'm sure that there are. But I can be confident in the tenure that we were in I think a 3 or 4 year tenure around Hurricane Katrina. We stopped. We picked back up last year. We're very confident in the ones that we review, that the engineers that are designing them are competent. They know what we're doing. We're reviewing what they're doing, and we're looking at it at final inspection to make sure that it's built properly. After that, again, as Jerome pointed out, no, we're not going out and doing an annual inspection or recalculating a drainage impact after the fact. So if that's something that would want to be added or looked at, certainly if there's a problem situation, we could take a look at it. But there is no routine beyond final inspection and the 1-year maintenance bond rolling out. In that drainage study, someone mentioned changing drainage areas. The first thing Sean and them will do is map out the existing watershed lines, what's draining where. A development may have, large enough, may have 3 different outfalls naturally. And we generally make sure that it's going to have 3 outfalls at the end, that they have to retain in each one of those outfalls. Typically, it's just one direction, but we're very careful that we don't add to. In other words, all the flows leaving out of that property, whatever they are in the existing condition, is what we try to match in the final condition. So the language, if you read it, is going to tell you that in that policy. The last issue is the most difficult issue to address, and I think it's the one that's causing the most concern, and that is my neighbor bought this property. He's developing it. He's built up 3 or 4 feet of fill. I'm sitting down here. I built my house 30 years ago, knowingly 2 feet below the 100-year storm event today, and I'm going to get water. All that we can do, again, is look at that adjacent property, and Sean will tell you he walks and looks at that adjacent property, before we even hold a what do y'all call it, a pre-application meeting, to first time sit down with the developer to talk about developing. Because Sean wants to be aware of what those drainage patterns are. So if someone else's property is draining onto the property being developed and there's fill required, then we acknowledge that, we force them to dig swales to redirect that water so that it has an outfall. It is the obligation of the developer to accommodate that water if it is being received from an adjacent property owner. Has that been done historically in the past? I don't know. I cannot attest to that. Again, we've had some intermittent periods, but there are proper ways to deal with this. Once again, those swales have to be maintained over time. Are they being maintained? They may grow up in trees. Who knows what the issue could be? It certainly is going to be a maintenance issue. So, you know, in summary, I think your ordinance is good. There are other parishes that wish they had your ordinance, to be quite frank with you. Is it perfect? No. Is the implementation perfect? No. I mean, these are very, you know, every single case is different. Every single case is different. And we have to make the best judgment we can. But I will say that as long as CSRs has been doing this, gentleman back here has been the reviewer. He started doing this when he started working for us and still doing it today. So I can tell you that we've been very, very consistent in the ones that we have reviewed. But to answer the question about fill, I will, and I mentioned this to Councilman Satterley last night, Monday night. When we suggested the fill mitigation policy that Jerome described, that if you're going to place fill, you must generate storage within that same watershed. That was in 5, 6. Once that started being implemented, I'd say the average amount of fill a development was doing was 1 or 2 feet, okay? Because when a developer goes to develop property, the first thing he's going to say is, how low is the property? How much am I going to have to deal with, right? So if he has a choice between a property that's 1 foot below the flood zone and 4 foot, which one do you think he's going to pick? He's going to pick the one. Particularly after that ordinance went into effect, and they didn't have to do it before. Trust me, they
Wouldn't that depend, sir, on the price of the two properties? I mean, maybe you could buy the one that needs 4 foot a whole lot cheaper.
It could, but you're also looking at time and complexity and a lot of other things. I would tell you, all things being equal, I think the answer to that is simple. My point is simple, that over time, those easy properties get plucked up, right? They get bought. So what's left today? And Sean will tell you that more and more we're seeing greater and greater trends of greater and greater fill. We, as engineers representing other private clients and other parishes, would typically tell a developer, once you get to about 3 feet, maybe 4, goodness, the cost of the fill is as much or greater than the cost of the land. It's not worth doing it anymore.
But wait, I thought we heard Mr. Fournier say that they can't bring fill in, so the cost is there. I mean, the dirt's already on their property, is that correct?
Well, all the dirt that they're digging from the detention ponds, that storage that we're creating for the water to store in is generally usable to offset the fill mitigation. So the detention pond construction...
That's my point. I mean, I just had my house lifted in Slidell, and I had to pay like $2,200 to bring in 5 loads of dirt. So I understand how expensive that could bring, but that was brought in. I mean, they didn't dig it off of my property in order to put that before they put the slab and then lifted my house 14 feet in the air.
And I would contend for the floodplain, that's worse to haul fill in. I mean, Baton Rouge adopted this same ordinance in 1989, or 1990, should I say, after the 89 flood. FEMA came in and said, if you don't do this, you're going to lose your flood insurance.
Right.
And that was the model that we used and when we developed this in 2006. But my point is simple. The lands that are now being acquired to develop have a higher probability of having a greater amount of fill. I'll just leave it at that. okay? That's what's left. So the question is, how much is much? How high are we gonna let them fill? That certainly, can and I think should be looked at. But
So should we be looking at things like forcing the issue beyond what our code requires with piers, with chain walls, with pilasters, with, some people call them stilts?
So that is a consideration. I will tell you, it sounds good on the surface, but there are some complexities. Your road still has to be built to, within 1 year, the ordinance requires your road to be 1 foot below 100-year, so that it's passable in a reasonable storm. So if you buy a piece of property that's 5 feet below the floodplain, and you build a road 1 foot from it, that's 4 feet of fill to build your road. The lot's going to be down below, still got to drain somewhere, okay? And then you're going to put the house on stilts, but so you've still got a lot of fill you got to move just to build a road to get in there. And
Again, I have that in Slidell, but I have a waterfront property, so they put 2 drains in the front. It goes into the canal and goes into Lake Pontchartrain. But we don't have a waterfront property here, although in the Drainage Region Channel, we might have a whole
exactly.
a
So
whole lot of property like that, where that would be a reasonable approach. Or could you put it up on stilts and then put drains in and make it go to one of these detention ponds?
you would have to drain it to a pond. All I'm trying to say is that you do have to elevate your road, and so we have to be cognizant of that. I also believe from the development community, and I think that you need to hear from the development community about this, their issue is consistency, is if I got to build on stilts, I want everybody else to. They're going to perceive that those stilts are not going to generate the same home value as a house on slab. Is that true or not? I don't know. That's what you're going to hear. I say if they're consistent, they're fine. In other words, if all developers have to do it, and particularly within a subdivision, if every house has to be on stilts, then there's not this case where one's on stilts and the next one, put in fill. I think it's time to look at it, but I'm going to tell you that there are a lot of complexities that need to be weighed and considered. It's not as simple as it sounds. It has more complexity than just raising the house itself.
Before I turn it over to the committee members, I have one question. How many rain events do you think happened in the last 10 years that exceeded this 10-year storm event that our code's built on, this 8.5 inches in a 24-hour period?
I don't know that.
But it's something we should find out, right?
That statistically is something that you can find out. What I would contend is it's not the 24-hour rain events, it's the 5-hour rain events. I mean, the city of Central had...
Well, the reason I asked you, you said Calcasieu that you work with right now, I believe, is already looking at 25. And there must be a reason for that. They must have looked at rain, or you guys are advising them, or y'all have looked at it in their behalf, or...
We're pretty neutral, to be honest, whether it's 10 or 25. We think it's more important that they get detention, that they get where you are, quite frankly, rather than whether...
They have even bigger problems than us.
I wouldn't say that. I think they're realizing that they had a horrendous rain last March.
I thought, Michael, you did. I thought you said that we're the envy of the group. I must have misheard you, sir.
I'm saying there are parishes that do not have detention and fill mitigation requirements that would like to have them.
Have ours, right?
Yes.
Yep.
Or something to your standard.
I don't have any questions. I'll let John go ahead.
John.
He has to get out.
Councilman Dawson.
Thank you, Michael. I wanted to just talk about a couple of concepts. The detention, and I'd like to go through the scenario of when you design a detention pond for a 10-year event, you have a 25-year event. Is this correct? That so you have these sized drains at the bottom, and they're designed to maintain the flow rate out at a certain rate, as long as that pond is within its boundaries. Correct. So is this correct? So when you have more rain than what the 10-year event is, then you have overtopping of the levees, or you have the possibility of overtopping the levees, and the runoff rates you know, I guess go off the chart. Is
They
that-
do go off the chart.
Okay,
What we do is we require them, we design the size of the pond for a 10-year event. And we require them to take a 100-year event and route that storm through the pond, mainly because we want to make sure they have an emergency overflow or an emergency system that lets that water out so it doesn't top a levee or flood a home or whatever. But
a
when you-
spillway type.
Spillway, it's an emergency spillway. But it is, at that point, it is not matching pre-development, post-development. In other words, the 100-year storm is going to be, the post-development is going to be greater than pre-development.
Right.
Because it doesn't have the storage volume to contain it.
Okay. Second, I guess the second scenario is, and you talked about, you have to get the fill from within the area. However, as most everybody talked about here, you know, certainly most of the fill is going to come from that area below the, or I would call it the enhanced depth of the pond. So it would be at a, you know, that fill would be taken from the area that stays wet. Is that correct?
Generally, the pond is situated on the lowest end of the site.
So,
It just works better that way.
so I understand the detention, but I'm having trouble understanding, you know, if you took the fill material from below the part that stays wet, whether you're actually accomplishing what you want to there by taking that, you know, whether you take that fill or not, there's no capacity there for water to, you know, to be replaced, yeah.
So I'll try to explain it this way. We are matching the volumes. If a developer has a 100-acre site, whatever volume of storage he has, however much water volume is below the 100-year floodplain when he starts, that's how much he has when he finishes. What I think the concern is what we would call fill encroaching into a floodway. In other words, so once that fill is placed in another part of the site, is it blocking the flow along a channel or tributary? If we were up in Colorado or Minnesota, I would say, yeah, good chance it is. But by our own admission, we have a levee on the Amite River, right? The Amite River doesn't, up until August, it didn't flow through our properties, right? Well, when the levee overtopped, it did, as you saw from the inundation study we did. So my point being is, if the fill is adjacent to a floodway, then yes, the argument could be made that shifting dirt around on a site and piling it up higher might block that cross-sectional area of flow. I just don't believe, and Sean can know the detail better than me, and we can certainly look at that. I just don't know that other than Manchac, and Manchac has a nice high bluff to it. That's generally the highest. That's another thing in South Louisiana. Our highest property is right on the bluff, and then we slope the other way. So a lot of the discussion you hear about floodways and protecting the floodways really doesn't apply to what we call a perch stream, which is what we have in Louisiana, where we have the overbank is the highest elevation that we have. So there is some merit to what you're saying, or the concept is that fill placement hurting the flow of water or hurting something, you know, someone else. We look at that. Again, I can't attest for everything that's happened in the last 30 or 40 years, obviously.
Right. And this may be out of your area of expertise, but in FIP, you know, from my appreciation is that, you know, changes to our floodplain management program that control the fill or do things to inhibit fill in the floodplain, you know, that we could see some general benefit in our premiums, I say that, reduced premiums for the residents if we do stricter controls within the floodplain.
Right.
Are you familiar with that?
I am familiar with it. We do not handle that for the parish. Jerome can help you with that. I do think that there are some credits for that. We worked with Terrebonne for a while in trying to look at ordinances and what could be done to increase the rating and lower the flood insurance. If we're not getting credit for it, we should, or should certainly ask or make sure that they are aware that we have that in the ordinance.
Thank you, Michael.
Mr. Lawler. Oh, I'm sorry.
Just
Mr.
had
Caglin.
one statement. It may or may not be answerable, Michael, but this flood of August of 2016 really opened a lot of people's eyes. No one anticipated it. I've been living here all my life, and I thought the one we had in '83, if those who are here and remember it, people were saying that was the worst. We'll never see that again. And here we are in 2017, and we saw it last year. I think, and we had a pretty significant rain event just last week. Pretty heavy rainfall in a short period of time. And the next morning, my phone rang, and it was a constituent complaining about, I didn't get this before the flood, and now I'm looking down here, and my land's flooding across the street or across the road. It's not. So I went out there, and I called DPW and asked them to come. They were tied up. They couldn't come out right away. So I went and looked at the situation. Part of the problem was debris in that gentleman's ditch. So I brought my shovel and my hand rake. I went out there and we raked the debris. Water started moving a little bit. But it didn't, he said it just doesn't move as fast as it should, or in his opinion. So I started looking down there, and then when DPW got out there, they started looking. And what they found was that the driveways, not the next door, but 2 doors down, those houses had been built in the 60s. And they had like a 6-inch concrete culvert for a driveway. Might have been adequate in 1960 when he had no neighbors or a few neighbors, but it's just not there now. So I think going forward we need to consider parish-wide inspection of all drainage, especially major drainage areas, but even those little complaints that we get, to determine that maybe a replacement of a culvert, making it larger in size and gaining capacity to move the water. Just in a common rain, we had that situation. So I think it's something that we as a council need to look at, checking into for the future reference.
Right, and that is the reason, one of the leading reasons why many communities go to this detention system is that once we mimic the existing flow that's already going through that series of culverts, and we don't make it worse, we're not going to go study every little outfall pipe from here to wherever. If we were adding to the flow, the developer would be obligated to go look at all that. So that's why you really don't see that much pushback from the development community about doing the detention, because they realize that, again, from a liability perspective, there is not an obligation to continue. So, that's going to really rest upon the parish to look at their existing systems to say, where are our problems and where do we need to fix them?
Thank you.
Councilman Lawler.
I like going last. Everybody's asked all the good questions that I was going to ask. Gives me an easy time. I do like one of the things, many of the things that John said about planning for the future with the 6-inch culvert. That's one of my major concerns is we're talking about a 10-year retention ponds, but without commenting on climate change, it just seems like we're getting more and more rain. And I know people in my district, Dawn Alamont, who's never flooded before, and every time it rains, she's got water around her house. I don't think it's just coincidence that neighborhoods are being built up all around her right now. So I think we need to look at planning for the future. It's just like with transportation. We can't build for today's population. We've got to build for it 25 years, 30 years down the road. That's why I think a 25-year, retention pond is the way to go in the future. Maybe even 50-year. I don't know that if there's a huge difference there, but maybe that's where we have to look at. I've got a couple questions, though. As far as a community retention pond, is this something that you're familiar with? or it could be beneficial to Ascension Parish or certain areas?
If watersheds followed, political boundaries, that would be wonderful. They don't.
Well said.
Frankly, Calcasieu is looking at instituting one in a trial effort, public retention system. They would certainly be more efficient having one larger system as opposed to each developer doing their own thing. But you get into, you got to site it, you got to be able to buy the property. You're probably, if you're picking a good low spot, you're probably going to have some wetland considerations. Yeah, it would be wonderful if you ask me. It's no different than the traffic situation. And you heard Lawrence say the other night, 10 different small subdivisions. Well, if you gave me the impact of all 10 and said, what can I do with it, I could really do a lot more good, right? And it's no different with drainage. You got a lot of little additions and you add them all up. But, unfortunately, developers don't all develop in the same watershed at the same time. They're going to go all over, and you've got, I don't know how, I'd be scared to ask Sean how many different watersheds we deal with here. So,
See, what I was thinking also, though, is we have a lot of subdivisions that are older and that don't have retention ponds. And I see Autumn View is a subdivision off of 42 that actually they're expanding the library on and flooding a lot of the people behind them are getting more water on it. Built up, put a big parking lot, and water's flowing all over these people now. I get calls on it all the time. And my thought is maybe a community retention pond that's not part of that neighborhood. It's been there for 30 or 40 years, could benefit them. And that's something, I don't know enough about it. If you could investigate that sort of thing for me.
Yeah, it's in essence a drainage project no different than deepening, changing a culvert or deepening a canal. You could design a system to store water in rainfall events. So, yeah, it could be looked at as a project very easily.
What, as far as increasing storage, and I think I heard this correctly, that you can increase storage by building on piers, whether they're concrete, brick, wood. Would that increase storage, or
it would just maintain the storage that you have? In other words, if the property's 2 feet below the floodplain, it's storing 2 feet of water in a 100-year storm event. If you built it on piers, it would still be able to flood. So they would not have to what we call fill mitigation. They would not have to perform fill mitigation. It would just stay in its current state.
So you could also use a combination of building on piers and maybe a 10-year retention pond to reach a 25-year benefit or a 50-year benefit?
If you allowed that area to flood on a 25-year event, yes. But would you want your yard to flood that often?
No, I certainly wouldn't.
Okay, so kind of back to the same. And again, that's what I want to caution about unintended consequences. Okay, make everybody go on stilts. But the people buy the house and it's up 6 feet and the children play in the yard just like everyone else, right? You get a 4-inch rain and their yard's full of water and they can't get to it. They're going to be making that same phone call to you saying, I'm flooding, right? So, and they're right, they're flooding. Now, we can tell them it was intended to flood, but 3 years goes by, they're going to make that same call, say, I'm flooding. So, that's what I'm saying. There's a lot that needs to be thought about, and we need to look at some other communities maybe that have done this, and, how are they doing it? How are they implementing it? Again, I'm not opposing the concept, and I'm not opposing looking at it. I think it is time to look at it, but I want to be very careful.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and end it there, unless anybody strongly objects, because we have one more item. From my understanding from Councilman Dawson, LSU is up 3-0 right now in Auburn, so. 4. Thanks for the correction, a positive one. I would say that the intention never tonight, ladies and gentlemen, and everyone else, wasn't to, try to alter the code or any particular way, but to begin a discussion. I think we've done that. We've had a healthy discussion, and we'll bring this item back. So I would ask that next time Mr. Sanji and/or both our representatives from CSRS, our engineering review agency folks, if you guys, Sean Chiro, if you guys would take a look at our LDC in depth, Appendix 5. I know you know all about it because you use it all the time in advising us. I did hear, it may be time to look at 10 versus 25-year storm event. I did hear periodic inspections after we have an accepted subdivision to recalculate drainage post-fac. Might be worth looking at, and some other things I won't review. But anything you would want to do right now that would help, I think would be helpful. So I'll ask you guys to go ahead and work on that first, and we'll bring it back next time. Item number 6 tonight, we'll have several speakers on that as well, is, yes. Madam Secretary, let the record show Councilman Cagnolati had an engagement for 7 o'clock, and we appreciate his forbearance that he's late for that already. I know the discussion was so riveting, he stayed longer, but we still have a quorum, so we're okay. Thanks, John. Item number 6 then is a temporary moratorium on development that requires field. I've listed myself on that, and Councilman Lawler. This came about, I don't know, a sidebar note he passed to me a few meetings back, as well as in public. It's no secret he is championing the potential cause of, or at least a discussion of whether or not we'd want to do that. So I thought it important that we go ahead and take a look at that. This relates to a specific issue, though, not just the LDC codes per se, although one of the codes is, as we learned tonight, fill. But whether or not we would want to take a look at Mr. Rue's comments about, and we've learned now that HNTV, well, actually not HNTV, but we're gonna do an RFQ to find the best company suited to develop what's called a wetlands fill plan that might result in a change in a wetlands fill ordinance, which then, of course, would affect subdivision development. And, of course, we learned at our drainage meeting that might take as much as 7 months, and maybe longer now that we've decided that we're going to go out on an RFQ to identify a company to do that study for us. So the question becomes, while we're doing that, do we just keep on? Or I see some head nods, we'll see in a minute. Or should we have a temporary moratorium in areas that require fill until we can come up with identification of where are these floodplains? I called them wetlands a minute ago. I guess that's misspeak. And what should we be doing about it relative to fill? So our first speaker this evening is Mr. Randy Shin. And most of you people are going to be redundant, so you don't need to state your address anymore. Mr. Shin.
I'm for it. All right. This is going to go both ways, I know. But I'm for a moratorium. The parish has done so much, so fast, so quick, and so little infrastructure going along with all the development that's been done that we're sinking. So I guess what I would ask is that you do at least a 1-year moratorium, at least along Highway 42. Highway 42 needs to be at least a year to give the city and the state a chance to improve the road conditions on Highway 42. In 2010, DOT did a traffic study on 42, and it had what they call a LOS grade, which is a level of service, and they gave it a F in 2010. I'm sorry, 2006. And nothing's been done since then. So, as far as the rest of the parish, no less than a 6 month. Hopefully that would give them a chance to do the development that was mentioned. I'm assuming the announcement about the turnabouts came from the meeting that was held here a couple of nights ago. Give them a chance to maybe get a jump on 1 or 2 of those to help alleviate some traffic. But just to continue the status quo that we're doing, we're not helping anybody. The LDC's actions have failed as far as infrastructure regarding traffic impacts, so I'm not gonna, I think to repeat that, it's probably bad news, but, I mean, you guys addressed that the other night, I guess. Realistically, the drainage impacts need to be included in that moratorium. Something needs to be done with drainage in relation to the moratorium, not just traffic. So.
Thank you, Mr. Shin. Ms. Gretchen Touye, I believe I got it correct this time, ma'am. If not, please correct me. Touye.
Yes, Touye.
Okay.
I'm for the moratorium. I feel the same, except on 44. It's more subdivisions. And it does impact around. It does impact my land. Hidden Cove does. I mean, they can talk about retention pond. The people there have been living there since the 70s. Everybody's house is even. You don't have to build up or build down. We didn't flood this past time, even with the, great flood. But the water's still coming. If it wasn't a wetland or if it did need to be filled, why is it so elevated? Why isn't it like all the other subdivisions that are older? Everybody's built on even ground. Your house doesn't sit higher or lower. Can anybody help me with that? I mean, and it's just getting worse. More houses, more subdivisions, more, and what? You can only, I'm at a loss for words. You can only, I guess, direct water flow away from so many subdivisions, but it's gonna still come back. I mean, you can dig ditches, this, that. If there's nowhere for it to drain, then it's gonna come back on the subdivision. I'm just wondering if maybe any of y'all can help me with that. I mean, are y'all even considering a moratorium seriously, or is it just a waste of time, or?
Well, I guess you
I'm
have
just
another minute.
asking.
You have another minute, ma'am, but I'll be glad to address your question when you're done.
Okay, I'm finished.
Are you done? Okay. Well, it's obviously a serious consideration, or it wouldn't be on the agenda.
Okay.
Number one, I have no idea how this body will vote, but you must realize that this body is just a sort of subsample of the larger body, the parish council.
Yes.
All 11 districts, and so the most we could do, if it would have come out of this committee with a positive recommendation to
Right.
Enact the moratorium, would be a recommendation.
Right, I understand that.
And that would require then a majority vote of the full council to do that. And
Yeah, I don't
so
think
forth.
my council.
But I do
will
have
vote.
I have a question for you.
Yes.
Hidden Cove, you mentioned it's impacting your land. I seem to recall you look awful familiar, and I've seen you post on
I live in a
social
subdivision off of
media.
931.
It was turned down, wasn't it?
What?
Hidden Cove.
Oh, no, it's, no. Hidden Cove is in the
Oh,
making.
it's Hudson Cove.
Hidden Cove.
Okay, I'm confusing it too. I
Where it
apologize for that.
also, floods Wallace Acres and yes.
Okay.
Thank
But
you.
Hidden Cove is not.
Hidden Cove,
Is
right.
built, and it's impacting your land, you're saying?
Well, it's there,
And
yes.
what you're claiming is it shouldn't have been built because you didn't have flooding before that.
Right, what,
I'm not trying to put words in your mouth,
Right.
I just want to understand you.
it's waterway is directed away. That place flooded. It held water. They had to put dirt in, because when we were little, we used to have tree houses and stuff there. It was always wet. I'm sorry, Mr. Fournier. And I'd like your number so you can explain to my neighbors too. But I do thank you for your time.
Thank you, ma'am.
I'm
And
glad you
thank you
heard
for
me
coming
out.
this
Thank
evening. Chase Melanson?
Good evening. And as far as the moratorium goes, after looking at the little PowerPoint we started the meeting with, I live in that blue area, and Mr. Dawson and Mr. Kluwat, you know, if they're not in that blue area, they're pretty close.
I live in it myself, Chase.
And you know, so I think we can all you know, tell stories about what we have going on there with the flood and everything. And I live on Highway 429 in Santa Mall, roughly half mile from the Pit or Holy Rosary Church, and you know, we're in a flood zone. That's the further east you go, the worse the flood zone gets, obviously. And development hasn't even made it to us yet. And you know, without disrespecting anybody, I would have to say that the Sorrento, Santa Mall area in August got the worst of it. And majority of those homes are older. They've been there, you know, at least 10 years, you know, some of them 30 and 40. And so if this development, you know, just keeps moving south and southeast into the parish, and we start filling up over there, you know, it's not going to take 4 or 5 inches of rain in a few hours to flood people. It's just going to take a nice little flash flood, a little 20, 30-minute shower, and people will be feeling the effects. And so, and I will admit, while sounding very hypocritical, because I just built there in the last year. I know how much fill I had to bring into my land. I do live on New River. You know, I put more water into the canal, and and just referring to number 5 without getting too off basis. Another problem is ever since the flood, I spent a lot of times in that canal with my kids in a little boat, and there's so much pluggage, trees, large trees. When you can't get a bateau down New River into Bayou Francois, it's pretty bad, and that's the scenario we have right now. And let's see what else we got. And last but not least, and I mean, putting anything into the field to get the elevation higher, shedding more water somewhere. If we utilize, and this is no fault of anyone sitting up there, but we have $40 million sitting in an account somewhere. If I remember reading that budget book correctly from the 2015 fiscal year, I think it was roughly $40 million. And if we use some of it instead of waiting 8 months to make a plan to try to get a meeting together, then you know these conversations may not have to take place. If we'd be a little proactive and not reactive. Thank you.
I want to apologize for not being Johnny on the spot with the timer. I'm pretty bad at it.
You're fired, Aaron. Dustin Kluwat.
Dustin Kluwat, 11080 Johnny May Road, clock's working. Y'all answered a lot of my questions throughout the dialogue. One of my main questions is, what is no fill? I mean, what exactly is the definition of no fill? Can I, for example, if I've got somebody putting a mobile home pad, you know, it's typical. Have you ever been under something that has no fill at all? I see where you guys are going. I think everybody's heart's in the right place. But, I mean, if you've ever been under something with no fill where the land builds up around it every time you cut grass and everything, you basically create a hole. Another thing, the definition between a floodplain and flood zones, I hear them kind of going back and forth. The insurance agent in me wants to stop y'all every time and tell y'all that everything's a flood zone. Some are preferred, some are not. So that's kind of, I'm just asking these questions out of concern. I'm from Santa Mall, still live right there on the outskirts. I know we got a lot of people building, spoke to a lot of people about this, and the understanding was that this just affects large subdivisions. I don't think people realize that, no, this can affect the individual home builders. So, I don't know if we could possibly call a little meeting together or something as y'all go further. I know this is just the beginning of this, but just want to make sure we think through it thoroughly, because whatever we do, whichever direction we go right here, can have some extreme consequences. Thanks a lot.
So, Mr. Kluwat, are you saying you're against the moratorium?
I'm neither for or against. I'm actually asking questions because I really don't know. I guess that's what does no fill mean, or
You
that's
just
what I'm
cautioning us to be careful.
Yeah, I'm kind of looking for some answers on what does no fill mean? If no fill, can I not build up my driveway? Can I not, I mean, that's kind of, yeah, can I not bring, I mean, who's enforcing me not to bring fill in?
Well, I don't, we do not have any, quote, ordinance that says no fill. I think that came about as a result of a comment made by Mr. Rue, right after the storm.
Okay.
That he was going to look at where these various
I guess
watersheds were.
I must have heard that and then
he
seen
used the
requires
word-
fill.
Yeah, well, he said he would be bringing us a recommendation of no fill.
Okay.
Now, what that means, I don't know. I mean, if we hire someone, let's say it would have been HNTB a few nights ago, my recollection, what I noticed is there was a 38-step timeline. I think it was step number 33. Said that after we did this floodplain management plan, the FMP, it would result in an FMO, a floodplain management ordinance, and that ordinance would relate to fill. How it would relate to fill exactly, I don't know, because the study's not done yet, but maybe one of my more bright colleagues would want to.
And I
Aaron, do you want to say something about no fill? I mean, this was originally your brainchild.
Yeah. I'd be happy to. And this comes from, at East Ascension Drainage meeting, I had suggested something like this, and actually Todd Lambert had brought up a very good point, and I've heard a lot of it from our engineers, is that a house on an acre does not have the same effect as a subdivision with fill. So one of the reasons I think this is important, we don't know. We don't know where we're going with it. We don't know what's going to go on, but I do understand that driveways and roads do need fill. And that's something that maybe if this goes forward to the council for a vote on it, that we look at specifying what that's going to be defined as. What I've learned in my year and a half in government is that things don't move unless you force it to move. This is a problem that we have. We have just talked about floodplain management at the last East Ascension Drainage meeting, and several of us on the council were under the impression that they were working on it. Nothing was being done on it.
myself included.
Yeah, that is unacceptable. So if we have to spur action on things by saying, hey, you know what? You're not going to be able to use fill until we figure out something. I'll be amazed, just like I was with impact fees, at how quickly decisions can be made and things can move forward when developers say, oh, wait a minute, I need to be able to use fill. The intention is not to stop growth. The intention is not to stop people from any part of the parish from being able to recover and rebuild. But if we end up with a situation that says, say 6 months from now, with our floodplain management that says, hey, these areas, we shouldn't be using any fill, we should be building up on pier and piling, then that should have been done 6 months earlier. So let's take a pause and look at how we can do that. Having no fill is not going to stop people from rebuilding. And we can, by the time it gets to the council, we may say, hey, you know what, we will allow a foot of fill, and that would, I think, suffice for a lot of trailers, and maybe to present a pad if you want to build up on pier and piling. But that's what we're going to do. At this point, it's just, hey, are we going to move this forward to the full council? Because I think it's something that's very important. I think it's something that is necessary so that we don't allow people to do some things now that harm us in the future. Let's just take a little pause. If people want to still build, they can still build. They just have to build up on pier and piling. And, I've said this before, beautiful houses can be built up. Every day I pass a house on, I'm heading to school, I just forget what road it's on.
Bluff Road?
No. When I'm just driving to Prairieville Middle, it is a small white house with these beautiful brick staircase. It's about 3 feet off the ground with brick pilings keeping it up. It's been there forever. Like I always say, when you move into a neighborhood and you see houses that are built higher, that are older, it makes you wonder, well, why aren't all the new houses like that? That's what I'm trying to prevent here, and that's what I'm concerned about, that we're going to take some action in the next 6 months that is going to be irrevocable. So let's slow things down a little bit.
And to touch on, I know y'all talked about it, but I think it kind of blends into this one. The retention pond thing, which I always thought was kind of a funny thing to see the retention ponds. A perfect example of a retention pond is out front of the old Albertsons, which it's bone dry right now next to Jack in the Box, and then as it rains, it'll fill up and then drain again. But it seems that, and I'm a firm believer in we can't think of everything, but now, since we were all 7 foot underwater, seems we always think of just a rain event. And I mean, as far as I recall from the flood, it rained, but in 3 days when Santa Maria received water, I got probably the worst sunburn I ever got. It was sunny outside, and I look over there at Eagles Landing off of Highway 42, and I mean, y'all shaking your heads, you know exactly where I'm coming from. There's no way that guy didn't have an impact on everybody neighboring him. Now, I'm not saying if the rain came straight from the sky, if he couldn't have held some of his own water in his ponds, but I guess the term would be from the engineer sheet flow maybe. You know, he didn't do anything for his neighbors there, so.
We have a lot of options that we can consider from now until this goes to the council. And that's my goal, is that we work with people that may not be comfortable with this to find something that we're all comfortable with. The goal is not to stop people from rebuilding, but it is to encourage people to build in the right way and give us the time to figure things out. Because right now, we don't have that time. And this is the time that it has to be done.
I would only add, too, and I agree with Aaron pretty much 100%. Once you do something, too, you can't take it back. So if we just keep everything going like it is and then decide that wasn't the best approach.
No, I'll admit, I have no answers.
No, I can't speak for my colleagues. You know, maybe no one feels that way. Everybody's always scared, and I can understand to stop growth because of the tax consequences is a prime example. But, you know. Sorry? Yes, you want to do it next? Are you done?
I'm done.
Thanks.
All right. Thank y'all, guys.
Thank you.
Councilman Kluot, if you have someone to go, did you want to speak next? I was putting you to the end and save the best for last.
Here for the night.
Okay. All right, well, then we'll leave you be. Anyone else have a pressing engagement? Mr. Pettit is waving his hand. Why don't you come on up here? I'll move you to the top of the stack.
I'm not a pressing engagement.
I have no rhyme or reason to this, but it was kind of a zoo with the 5-6 mix-up. But go ahead,
Okay.
Jeff.
Jeff Pettit, Family Road, Gonzales. Moratorium, not just fill. And I have a question for Mr. Fournier on fill, but we need to revisit the subdivision rules and regulations. We need to revisit the way we do our traffic studies and drainage studies. We maybe need to revisit our land use code, our master plan. There's some issues that have come up as I attend the planning and zoning meetings, and questions asked of our planning department, and there seems to be some inconsistency on some issues. So I think a moratorium would be a good time to sit back, reflect, and update what we have. When I heard Mr. Sanji say, and I appreciate what he said, that he feels for us for what we went through last August. I know I flooded, and I know many other people in this room flooded. Randy Kluot had 38 family members flood, something like that, or more. So I just had my wife, myself, and 3 grandchildren, plus 2 dogs, 3 cats, and some fish. But yeah, fish were fine. But I understand that CSRS and Sean Shuro do the studies, review them according to parish ordinances. I want to bring up one thing. 2006, Parker Place, and the recent approval of Brookstone that was denied and then overturned by the appeals board, which is no longer a part of this parish. They approved it, but they're flooding. They're flooding the older neighbors around them. and that was approved by CSRS as the ERA, Engineering Review Agency. So what I'm saying is we need to raise the threshold and the standard for traffic studies and drainage studies. I guarantee you, someone said how many, Doc, you asked how many 10-year rain events have we had this year? Well, my question would be how many 25-year rain events have we had this year? You want the answer? 8 in the last 12 months.
Do you know that for a fact, sir?
I do. NOAA out of Slidell. Oh,
Sorry.
Thank you, Jeff.
Well, I've got about 4 other things to talk about, but
Maybe next
thank
time.
you.
Mike Latchley? He doesn't want to go before you. I'd like him to go before me. Randy, would you come up? All right, Mike, I called your name.
Good evening. My name is Mike Latchley. I live on 16464 Highway 930 in Prairieville. About this time last year, Mr. Kluart and I got ill with each other about this supposed moratorium. It was on a different plane, but we're kind of close to the same one now. Talking about your Phil. Well, I can side with him when it comes to Phil on a home, on a separate piece of property, not in a neighborhood, because I dug 240 yards off of my property. I extended my pond, built my house pad up 3 feet, and I missed the flood by 3.5 inches. My property line is Muddy Creek backflow ditch, which goes into Muddy Creek, into Manchac, into A-Meat. So I caught all that backflow, and I still missed it by 3 inches due to the wisdom of an elder, AKA Mama. So I understand what you're trying to say about adding fill for neighborhoods. Yes, too many neighborhoods, too much fill, pushing too much water, too many places. All these surveys and all these engineering what have yous cannot predict Mother Nature. She's going to act accordingly on her own accord. You can walk the property. In theory, you can say, oh, well, the water's going to drain this way. Well, I'm here to tell you, the property I'm on was farm grade property a long time ago, farmed by the Broussards. It flowed from east to west. Now, because of a neighborhood that was improperly engineered, the water flows south to north across my property. Now, this has been going on 10 years. Come to my house. Let me show you on a rainy day where the water goes. Under my shed, under my 13,000-pound travel trailer, across my property, into the ditch, making my yard into a swamp. The property that the fence that separates my property is a river. It's taking out the land going into Muddy Creek. Right there, and in the floodway of my property, I have a spillway. Come look what it's doing. The parish, the guys that cut the grass in the coulees, they can't cross over this because of all the erosion taking place. Because of what? A new neighborhood. So yeah, I got an issue with filling dirt for the neighborhoods. But when it comes to a separate pad on a separate piece of property, like mine, what I did does not affect anybody. What this neighborhood did directly affects me. So yes, I'm for the moratorium. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Latchley. Samantha Shin.
Good evening again. Aaron, you really kind of hit home everything.
Sorry.
It's not mine.
Hey, you see, you were about to compliment him and he messed up again.
Yeah, messing up the timer. You really hit home everything I was thinking about. I think we need to pause. We need to look at what's happening. If we're not going back and reviewing a year later, what's the traffic of a new neighborhood? What's the drainage of a new neighborhood doing, and it's not being reviewed like it should be? Then no, we don't know what's going on. He just said you can't predict Mother Nature. You can't. And a comment earlier was now someone builds on stilts and their kids are playing in the yard, but then they flood every time. Okay, let's learn from the past. We did it. It's flooding. You build on stilts. You chose to buy there. I mean, maybe don't build there. Let's pause. Let's see what's going on. Let's see what needs to be improved. I agree that it shouldn't possibly affect the individual who needs 1 foot of fill. The neighborhoods, yeah, that needs to go on pause. There's too many going up. Eagles Landing, I think, just got approval recently for the next set. I don't know what the correct term is for it, but the next set of houses to be released to build. Because I know I went through and I counted individually how many plots were approved for the meeting last month for Hudson Cove that they were trying to approve. But I am for the moratorium. I think it needs to happen. We need to see like where we're going. And thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Shin. Randy, are you, Councilman Kluwak? This will be our last speaker unless someone has not filled out a card.
There's not a 30-second button here.
No, I think everybody, Mr. Latchley, everybody's pretty much kind of talked. And what I wanted to cover is you basically take the statement that on the agenda item that, temporary moratorium on development that requires fill. Okay, and several people have talked about that, and I've talked to several of you guys. The subdivisions, yes, take a look at that as you go forward out of committee into the council. But I just, as a representative of District 6, and we got a lot of rural areas. Bill's got as much rural area and damage as I got, so does all toward Dempsey and all, is that we take in consideration that, people that don't really affect folks. Like the gentleman said, he built up his place, he had to, that don't affect. So let's not just draw a line in the sand. Let's take a good look at what we're doing without crippling the people that's trying to build a house. They're not the large developers. They're not totally changing the whole world. And what Mr. Sanjay said and everything, all the explanations, because agenda items 5 and 6 go together anyway tonight. And we do have some ordinances in place. And we need to find some better way to enforce them. We've talked about this. And, like I said, something needs to be done now. So please give consideration to the individual homeowners and the people that's not affecting the world, just trying to get them a house to live in as you go forward from committee. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, Randy. Okay. Yes, Mr. Shin. Could you come to the microphone, sir, just so that everyone at home can hear?
I wasn't clear, and I didn't realize that the no-fill was for parish-wide. I feel the no-fill needs to be instituted for subdivisions. The individual homeowners that need to fill should be allowed to. So I'm kind of 50.
Duly noted, sir. Thank you.
50-50
Okay, we're going to close the public comment period at that point. Well, I allowed one, so I'll be very brief, Chase. Everybody wants to see LSU.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Both of the Kluwaks brought up really good points I didn't think about, but
which Kluwak? We had two.
Both.
Here
Both.
Okay.
Yeah. Just talking about like what they mentioned, like me, like I just built last year. If this was in place, I wouldn't have been able to put my home on an acre of land in Santa Mall.
Right.
And that just kind of hit home. I'm just curious if anybody's got the opinion of I know he's not here, Mr. Parrington or whoever, about the legal, if we can legally make developers not do one thing while allowing individuals to do something else. If we can let Joe Blow, bring in dirt on his 2 acres of land, but we can't let this developer bring in on his. I was just curious y'all's opinion on that.
Duly noted. And Bill, did you have an opinion on that? You were nodding your head.
I was agreeing with him.
Okay.
We need to get, I think that.
Legal opinion.
If we're kind kind of in the comment part from here is I think that to me it's the first step, which is we need to see what we can legally do. I know there are some definite rules for that. I think you have to have a finite period. It has to be a reasonable period. It has to be to accomplish a certain
we
a
do.
certain thing. So we need to know what exactly, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, we at the risk of stating the obvious, as a committee, we did the same thing. You might remember, Chase, with traffic impact fees enacted both. Well, we advanced from this committee both that and a moratorium, one being built on the shoulders of the other, and the moratorium, of course, became moot because, like Councilman Lawless stated earlier, it got everybody in a big hurry to get something done that couldn't be done for 10 years, quite frankly. Or actually 2 years prior to that, when we had an exploratory committee looking at, appointed by the council, impact fees for roads. So with that, we'll close the public comment period, and certainly anything this committee does will have to be blessed by legal counsel. What is the pleasure of the committee tonight? You want to bring this back, or do we want to have a motion here tonight? Mr. Lawler.
First of all, I'd like to say that I hear everything that Randy said, Mr. Shin said, that Dustin said. It doesn't fall on deaf ears. That's part of the reason we did this, to learn more. I've talked to other council men and women about this, and there is it's an understanding that we have to work together and figure something out, and that has not fallen on deaf ears whatsoever. I'd like to make a motion to move this to the full council. When is our next meeting?
It's a week from tonight.
Why don't we do it to the first meeting in June?
June 1.
I don't know what the date. The first
June 1.
Is that
June 1? I think you said June what?
June 1.
That would give us a little more time to.
Is that the Donaldsonville meeting?
Yes.
Going to have a limited audience there. If you can ask these people to come back and speak.
I know what these people are going to say, and I thank y'all for caring. But I was hoping for more people. I don't see huge difference in having in Donaldsonville versus here.
It's your motion.
So I'd like to move it to the June 1 meeting, and not to hide it from anybody. I just don't want to keep putting things off. But I do think we need a little bit more time to work out, how we can make this an effective moratorium, protect, I think, interests that are proper and that need to be protected, but also give us some time to get it right. We don't want to get this wrong. So I'm going to make a motion that we move enacting a temporary moratorium on development that requires fill to the June 1st full council meeting.
Okay.
So I'd like to make a substitute motion.
Mr. Dawson?
As we talked about, there has to be a finite period here, and at this point in time, to me, the reason to have the moratorium is that so that developers during this period when we're doing the floodplain management ordinance or floodplain management plan, that developers don't storm into our planning office and try to draw permits ahead of time, and we have a rush of that while we're trying to modify these regulations. So, and that's what we talked about in the impact fees, was doing a moratorium until we could implement the impact fees. Now, so we had we had a proposal from HNTB to do the floodplain management ordinance, and it was 8 months, on their schedule. I personally felt like that was, a little longer than what I had anticipated and what I felt was necessary. So that's one of the reasons that we asked for the RFQ, is to see if perhaps there's somebody out there that can do that on a better schedule. So I think that for us to consider a moratorium on the council level without knowing the period it's going to take to do the floodplain management ordinance, I think is ahead of the process. We need to, if you're going to implement the moratorium, temporary moratorium, you have to know, what the schedule is to do the changes to the regulations. So Having said all that,
It's the
and,
longest motion?
What exactly is the motion?
so this is a doc, motion. It's,
No, it's not. No, that was not nice.
no, the length of, is,
Bill, play nice in the sandbox.
is that we bring this back to strategic planning at the next strategic planning meeting, and by that time, perhaps we'll have heard back from the RFQ, and we can make a finite recommendation to the council about a time period and what effect it have. Also, during that time period, we can use that to have Mr. Parrington, our parish attorney, advise us on, what we can legally do.
Okay, so I think I understand this. We have a substitute motion on the table to Mr. Lawler's, well, it's not amended, it's a substitute, so it's a completely different motion that we, I'm gonna use the word, if you allow me, Bill, not table, but, because that means we have to do that yet at this meeting. Defer this, as I understood you, to the next strategic planning committee meeting, which would allow time for legal counsel and other entities to give us a better handle on how long it may take to get a floodplain management study conducted in actual ordinance that would advise us in this matter.
Correct.
Correct? Okay, do I hear a second for that motion?
We have loggerheads here.
Well.
I believe the
Laurel and
committee
Hardy,
chairman can-
what a fine mess you've gotten me into.
Committee chairman can
With,
break. And there's a reason for that.
would you, without a second, it either has to die or.
Neither motion has a second, I might add.
Yes, but yours is on the table, so it has to be parliamentary-wise dispensed with first, one way or another. I tell you what, I'm going to second it in order to facilitate discussion, Bill.
You second mine?
Yes, to facilitate discussion. And by the way, for those who are not totally attuned to parliamentary procedure, a second is no way indicative that the individual given the second agrees with the motion, but rather wants to hear more discussion. Mr. Lawler.
I would just like to say that, for one thing, as a practical purpose, I don't think I will be able to be here on June 8th at the next strategic planning meeting. I also believe that 3 weeks is more than enough time to speak with legal counsel, speak with other members of the council and the public to develop a plan for the moratorium. We don't need a specified date tied to an actual floodplain management plan. We can tie it to 6 months and or a floodplain management plan. And our hope, of course, is that we get this floodplain management plan in a quicker time period than the 8 months that was offered to us earlier. So I certainly think that this will be more of an incentive to get that faster time, that time limit on the floodplain management plan. That's part of the reason I think we want to move it forward. I'm not for delaying this or delaying any action on this. I think 3 weeks we can handle this pretty well.
Okay, any further discussion
Oh, I
on
have,
this
yeah.
substitute motion?
I have
Mr. Dawson.
Well, I think what we're talking about here is not really making a recommendation because you have none of the blanks are filled in. So as they talked about here, there's, is it no fill? Is it a foot of fill? Is it in subdivisions only? Is it for, lots only? Is it for does it exclude lots? Does it exclude flood victims? Those are just some of the questions that I have that we're not making a recommendation to the council on. Now, I didn't quite, and maybe a clarification on, was it 6 months, or whichever comes first, 6 months, or the floodplain management ordinance? So, in effect, if you take 8 months to do the floodplain management ordinance, and then you have to pass the ordinance, which is, takes you another month or a month and a half, then you have, in that scenario, under the current conditions, you've got probably 2 months, maybe 3 months that you're gonna have out there that the floodplain management conditions, the amount of fill is gonna be changed, and so you got 3 months for developers to come in and get their plans approved under the old ordinance.
Mr. Lawler?
If I may, first of all, the time that it will take to pass the moratorium will also be extended. We can't pass it at the next council meeting. It would be introduced at that point, and then it would have to show up at the Gonzales council meeting to actually pass it.
Or turn it down?
It's not an ordinance. It's a resolution.
Okay, well then, okay, well, it can be done at the next one, so that will speed things up, and I'm fine with that. But if we get to a point where we get the floodplain management plan back, and we're afraid that there's going to be this gap in there, we can extend the resolution another 30 days, another 15 days. Likewise, if progress is being made, and this is supported by case law, if progress is being made towards a floodplain resolution, we can, at the end of the 6 months, it's not quite done at 6 months, we can extend it based on the fact that progress is being made to a goal. So we're not going to run into a risk of having a gap at any point between coming up with a floodplain management plan and then passing that ordinance. We can always extend the plan, the moratorium as we need to. And as far as the specifics of the moratorium, at this point, I'm recommending the ordinance, the resolution going forward as a moratorium on fill in general, very broadly, and the plan is at the meeting to have it amended based on discussion with the public and other council members. And I think when we go to that meeting, that full council meeting, we can discuss at that time what we really want to see. I mean, if you like, I could amend this recommendation to be that we recommend that we disallow fill in excess of 1 foot on any property that is the plot is less than 1 acre, and that would provide a lot of people with an acre or more to be able to do it. But that's the kind of information I think that we should work on before we get to the next council meeting, and then work on in that council meeting and come up with a specific plan that's acceptable to everybody. I'm not for delaying this, because if we delay this, the inevitable is coming, and we're going to see a rush of people trying to get in before that happens. The exact concern that you've expressed, we're going to be giving them several months to get in there and enact those developments.
So it goes against the charge of the committee. The committee is supposed to do the heavy lifting and supposed to make the recommendation. Now that's the last comment I'll make.
We've had probably in excess of the 2 turns each that our parliamentary workshop a mentor told us we should have, so I think we've exhausted discussion. So we'll go ahead and vote on the motion on the table, which has been moved and seconded. No, any objection?
Yes. It's your motion.
It's your motion. Okay, so we will have a roll call. Mr. Dawson.
This is on
This is on your motion.
Be careful.
I'll vote yes.
Yes. Mr. Lawler?
I vote no.
And the chair votes no. So that motion fails. Back on the table is the original motion of Mr. Lawler. Mr. Lawler?
I don't think anything else has to be said.
Did you said something earlier about in the other discussion on the other motion, you might want to amend it in any way? Are you happy with the original motion?
I'd be happy to amend it to provide that, and I want to write this down a little bit.
Don't just be happy. If you want to amend it, amend it.
Well, I'm considering. Give me one moment.
I don't mean to be rude, but
no, I know.
we're pushing. Oh, we're past 8 o'clock. That's surprising me.
I'm not going to amend it. I'm going to leave it as a motion to prohibit prohibit development that requires fill other than for roads. I don't want to impede the progress of any transportation work that may be done for, as far as that's concerned.
Okay, and as a courtesy, like for Mr. Dawson, I'm going to second that so that we can hear further discussion.
I think we've had enough discussion. I'm done.
Any more discussion?
None.
Hearing none, we'll go ahead and vote on the motion. Mr. Dawson?
No.
Mr. Lawler?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. Motion carries. The chair will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I have a substitute.
It's been moved and seconded that we adjourn. This meeting is adjourned.